Hey everyone, thanks for joining another Rich Seriez live show. Today I have a special show with my amazing guest, David Nachman. He is the CEO of FastSpring, and he will be talking about his journey to his career success and how he is leading the way to the future of Saas. Give it up to my guest, David Nachman. Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. It's good to be here. It's right after a long Thanksgiving weekend, so feeling well rested, charged up, ready to go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining in here. You have such an amazing background. I was looking at your resume. You're a 3-time CEO, so you're currently a CEO right now for FastSpring. Amazing. I'm hoping to learn a lot more about you and also, what you're doing right now for the future of SaaS. So could you just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got started in your career?
Sure, happy to. And first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored to be here. So my career really starts with my undergrad. I went to UCLA. Like many college students, when I started my career, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And I was really privileged to have a great mentor in life. I came from a family where there were no people in business, so I didn't have that as my mentor. But I had an econ professor that I had taken a couple of courses with, ultimately ended up being a research assistant for her. And she played a really big role in certainly shaping my early career. So she was very focused on capital markets research. And that's what I was helping her with, and really pushed me in the direction of investment banking. The very first, I'd say, true job I had, or internship, was working at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. And she was instrumental in helping me get that role. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I wouldn't trade it, but I don't want to go into government. I'm glad I didn't stick with it. But from there, after another internship, I did end up starting my career in investment banking, did that for a couple of years, then went into management consulting for 6 years. And what I would say is, early in my career, for me, it was all about how do I learn the most that I possibly can. And I loved investment banking, and I loved consulting from the perspective of just seeing a lot. You get to work with a lot of different executive teams. You get to see them exposed to a lot of different challenges, I'm sorry, not channels, in a lot of different industries in a really short amount of time. So I felt like it was great condensed learning for me. But ultimately, I got to a point where I decided I didn't want to be in a client service business anymore. I really wanted to try my hand out as an operator in technology. So I left consulting, started my career in technology, and ultimately that led to where I am today.
That's awesome. So so I know you had some mentorships. What books or resources or even mentors influence your leadership style or perspective on business anyways?
Yeah, so I'll touch on a few things that have kind of shaped my perspective, and they're not exactly everything you've said. I mentioned one of the mentors, but starting with the book, I think for me, the most influential business book I ever read was The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, written quite a while ago, but a pretty seminal book. And it's really about the risk of maintaining the status quo and becoming too defensive as a business, particularly if you get to the point where you become an industry, a category leader. And if you look at the history over time, there are many, many companies that were leaders in their industry, and they didn't maintain that leadership position because they weren't willing to take the risks that might cannibalize what got them to where they were. So they stopped innovating. So that's really taught me an awful lot about the importance of disrupting the model on a continuous basis and disrupting your own business to do that, because you won't survive over time if you don't do that. Second is actually a company I worked at that really
Oh,
shaped my
really?
perspective. So I was at McKinsey and Company. A lot of people have heard of it. I was there for 6 years. Fortunately, I think it had a better name then than it might today. It's been in the news for good and bad
Yeah.
more recently. But I learned a lot that was really, I think, influential to how I approach business. Problem solving rigor was something that I really, really learned. Hypothesis driven approach to solving problems. Go in, predicting what you think the answer will be and try and prove or disprove that. The power of the back of the envelope analysis. It doesn't
Mm,
always take a
okay.
huge amount of analytical work to actually bring, the data you need to bear to a problem. And then constructive dissent was very much a part of that culture. And that's something that I've carried forward. The last I would mention in terms of a mentor, and again, I already touched on an individual that was a mentor. This was an organization that I was a part of for many years. The organization is called Biscuit. It was started by Michael Milken a number of years back. And it's a roundtable group. In our group, there were 16 companies that would get together once a month, an executive from each of those. And, in theory, you get together and you solve business problems.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
In practice, it was much less about kind of the classical business problems than I thought it would be going in. And it turned out it was really about people challenges and leadership
Right.
challenges.
Yeah.
And at the stage in my career when I was doing this, that's what I really needed. I'd gotten a pretty good education from McKinsey and my business school training in, how do you solve a classical business problem? You don't learn as much about leadership in those settings. And, I learned some things around the importance of trust in organizations and the importance of relationships in establishing trust within an organization. And without trust, you don't really get candor. And without
Right.
candor, you don't get intellectual honesty. And without intellectual honesty, you don't really solve the real problem. So my experience there working with 15 other executives that were, month in, month out, grappling with leadership issues on a constant basis really gave me a lot of exposure and really shaped a lot of who I am as an executive now.
No, I agree with you. I read How to Win Friends and Influence People. Right.
Another great
That's
book.
such a great, yeah, amazing book, and that really helped me as a person. That's a good thing about that. You could carry all those principles in real life instead of just the business world itself. I
Exactly.
100% agree with that. So
Yeah.
how yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to build on that by saying, I'm a firm believer that you can't really separate out your personal life and your business life. You're
Mm-mm.
a person first, and you've got to learn to interact with people as humans, regardless of what the setting is. But the things that are going to work at home with your family, with your spouse, to a large extent, are going to be successful in business because it's about listening, it's about empathy, it's about
Mhm.
caring for others. All of those things really cross the boundaries of personal and business.
I really like how you put that, that how you phrase that. That's really good. 100% true. Whenever you're a leader in a family, right? It's if you're able to lead a family greatly, you and it's successful, you could definitely approach that in the business sense. So, how would you say how would you define your leadership style, and then what principles guide your decision making as a CEO? Then.
Yeah, I think the word I would probably go to first in describing my leadership style is collaborative. I'm
Hmm.
a very collaborative leader, and I believe the best ideas should win and should really hold the day, regardless of the origin of those ideas. So, again, back to constructive dissent, I really believe an awful lot in that. In terms of my decision making approach, I would say situational is the word I would lead with there. And what I mean by that is I think about the impact on the business and I think about the impact on the people or the team when I think about how I go about solving a problem or making a decision. And the reality is, the vast majority of decisions that we all make in business um, don't have all that much impact in the grand scheme of things. And in those cases, speed often matters a whole lot more than the rigor with which you make decisions. And, I try and rely on gut and intuition. I've been at this for a while, so that's one of the benefits you get from the gray hair I have is, you start to get pattern recognition. So
Right.
when it's not huge impact on either the business or the people, I try and rely on my gut. When it's the situations in the middle, that's where I apply the 80-20 rule as much as I can. So I need some analytical rigor. I need to be able to quantify outcomes as best I can,
Hmm.
but I don't want to boil the ocean. I want to do some
Yeah.
very quick back of the envelope to try and educate my decision and then go based on that. And then lastly, there are situations where, the impact really is very significant and or the complexity of the decision
Hmm.
really is quite high. And those are the cases where you really do need the analytical rigor. I am very, very much a proponent of database decision making, but where it makes sense and in the right
Right.
situational uh, context. The other thing, kind of going back to the first two categories, what you'll learn over time, and you probably already know this, is there aren't all that many decisions that can't be reversed if they're bad decisions. So again, the notion
Yeah.
of, acting with speed, establishing certainty, as long as you're willing to be flexible and realize, wait a minute, I made the best decision I could with the information I had at hand, but now I've gotten a little more and that was the wrong decision. Now I need to go back and revisit it. And that's an awful lot of the decisions we make.
So, I mean, yeah, making decisions, especially, for a company, it could be super challenging. What are some of the biggest challenges you face as a CEO, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's plenty of challenges you face as a CEO. Business challenges are always out there. For me, frankly, the most challenging uh, things I need to grapple with are the really tough people decisions, and those come with a role.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that, it's typically in the leadership ranks. Um, Almost all businesses go through this, where you have great leaders that played a huge role in getting the business to where it is, but you get to a stage where what's needed going forward may be a different skill set than the people that got you there. And that's tough. I never ever
Yeah.
make those decisions lightly because they've got enormous impact on the individual, on the
Right.
company, and they often feel unfair because here's someone who is a superstar that did great things to get the business here. So, the way I get over my hesitancy in making those decisions is I step back and I think about my obligation to the rest of the team. In my role, I've got an obligation to everybody in the business.
Right.
I've also got an obligation, to stakeholders beyond our employees, to ensure that we're as successful as we can be. And I take that really seriously, and it does require making those decisions from time to time. So I try and approach them as honestly as I can and as empathetically as I can. And I try and help those people as much as I can, get into the next great situation. Because again, these are almost always really talented people, or they wouldn't have been in the position they were in to begin with.
Right. Well, all right. So let's step back when you first started with FastSpring. So, what growth have you seen since you joined FastSpring back in 2019?
Yeah. I've seen growth in a lot of areas. The measuring stick is often revenue, and our revenue is more than doubled in that time frame. So
Wow.
I think everyone here hopefully takes pride in that. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do. But I'd say beyond that, just our capabilities as a company and the breadth and depth of our functionality is pretty night and day in a lot of ways from where we started. And what I take an awful lot of pride in is the skills in our team.
Right.
I can see the professional growth in a lot of the people that have been here a number of years, and that's fantastic to see. And it's they've been in the trenches, they faced a lot of challenges, and they've stepped up and they've learned a tremendous amount. So that's the other way I measure growth, is just understanding how our team has evolved and hopefully benefited in terms of their career experience and ultimately their career profile.
So for people that don't know what FastSpring is, what is FastSpring, or what do they specialize in? How does it help people or businesses out?
Yeah, so we are a full service e-commerce platform that's purpose built for emerging growth companies that sell either software or other digital goods on a global basis. It's a bit of a mouthful. What does that mean? We do payment processing, we do subscription management, we do tax management when it comes to sales tax, VAT, GST on a worldwide basis, and a lot more. We also operate as something that's called a merchant of record, and many people don't know what that means. What it means is technically when an end buyer buys one of the products or services from a seller on our platform, technically they're buying from FastSpring.
Mhm.
And what that enables us to do is step in the middle of the transaction and do a lot of the heavy lifting on behalf of our customers. An example would be we take over all aspects of tax management. So, not only calculating and collecting the sales tax on a global basis, registering and remitting and filing around the world in every country that they may sell in, and taking on the liability associated with that. So the value proposition is a lot of things. We'll help them be more successful on a global
Right.
basis. We'll simplify their life tremendously. And ultimately, we'll ensure that they're compliant.
So I know you mentioned that FastSpring helps out businesses. So could you describe, what the company's mission is and what values they have to help businesses?
Yeah, our mission is one that really excites me and hopefully excites everybody here. Our mission is to democratize the software industry.
That's
And what
awesome.
we're doing is we're enabling companies of any scale based anywhere in the world to compete on the quality of their product rather than who has privileged access to various distribution and
Hmm.
e-commerce channels.
That's
So we're
true.
trying to level the playing field. So there is a huge number of software developers located outside of the US. The vast majority of software developers are not in the US, and they're getting more and more innovative in developing great products. We're helping them successfully bring those to worldwide audiences. So, and then I think the second question was our values.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah, call if you ask that, or I just go there all the time because I think they're
Yeah,
part and parcel.
yeah. What's the values on that of your
So
company?
we've got three values. We like to keep it simple and memorable, but to me, they're very powerful values. First one is make a difference.
Hmm.
And really, what that means is we're focused on the impact of what we're doing rather than the activity itself. It could be the impact on our customers, the impact on the business, the impact on our people. We're always trying to have positive impact. So if we're not moving the needle, it doesn't really matter that we spend a lot of time on something and put a lot of work
Hmm.
into it. It's really about
Right.
what are we accomplishing as a result of what we're doing. So make a difference is the first. The second is seek to understand. And this goes back a little bit to my consulting roots of really try and understand things beyond the superficial level. There's an old saying of a problem properly diagnosed is a problem solved. Often the solution isn't that hard. The hard thing is very often understanding what you are really solving for. And what I've learned through my career in business is often people have solutions in search of problems. They're really not digging to understand what
That's true.
we are truly solving for.
Hmm.
So seek to understand is all about that. The last one is act with urgency. And at some level very straightforward, but the essence of it is really that speed matters and we can't let perfection get in the way of progress. Yeah, there are occasional times when perfection really matters, but most of the time progress and being able to iterate is far more important than getting it absolutely right the first time. And frankly, you learn a lot by doing because you get
Right.
feedback once you do. So that's what enables us to move quickly is understanding when progress is more important than perfection.
So with that being said, you mentioned that You set failures and everything like that. So what strategies do you employ to foster innovation and creativity within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question because innovation and creativity are so key to
Hmm.
business success. And it starts with the maybe it doesn't start with the first word you you said, but let me touch on that first word you said, which is creating a culture where failure is accepted and frankly embraced and where trust exists. Because in my mind, those are the two baseline conditions that have to exist to create innovation. If people aren't willing to take risks
Yes.
for fear of failure, and if they don't trust others, and bad
Right.
repercussions for making a mistake, innovation comes to a screeching halt. The next thing, once those baseline conditions are met, is I try and hire people with an entrepreneurial mindset. Hard to create that. That's
That's
something that, you know, it
yes.
often exists or it doesn't. But when you get entrepreneurial people together, magic often happens. So if you look at our senior team, these are all senior executives. They're all successful, have done it multiple times, yet every one of them is willing to get their hands dirty. And hopefully you've experienced this, but they're scrappy people that have that entrepreneurial mindset. And what happens when you hire people with that entrepreneurial mindset is they very often then hire people in their own mold. Entrepreneurs want to hire others that are entrepreneurial. So
Yes.
after those first baseline conditions are met, then it's about the people, and then it's really about creating an environment that fosters collaboration and interaction. Innovation rarely happens in a vacuum. It's very often something that happens as one person builds on the idea of another and improves it, and so on down the line. So we try and create that environment where people do get together, not always around the task at hand. We do some things to brainstorm
Mhm.
as much as we can to create those kind of random intersections. And that's harder in a remote environment. That used to be hallway talk often and whiteboarding, and that's a little harder. So, we
Oh
have
yeah.
to be a little more thoughtful about how we create that now. But I think, we're doing a pretty good job. We can always get better. But that's the last piece.
No, I will have to say I do experience that right now. I the culture you have developed, I can see that we are collaborating with everyone, not just our team, but other departments as well. So I could be a testament to that right there. With all that collaborative strategies in a competitive e-commerce landscape, what sets FastSpring apart from other platforms then?
It's a variety of things. And the first one I think, alluded to a little bit, but we are purpose built for the market that we target. So we're not
Mhm.
trying to be everything to everybody. We've decided to focus very much on a specific market, which is software and other digital goods providers that are selling on a global basis, and
Mm,
those that are still in the growth stage of their business. So we've got over 3,000 customers that fit that definition. And our platform and overall solution is purpose built for those. So we understand what the challenges are that they face. We know how to serve them really well. And we can also consult with them because we've seen this happen time and time again in our lab. We know some of the best practices that work and those that don't. So that's the first is, again, being purpose built for a specific segment. Second is we've got a really flexible platform. So
yes.
it doesn't matter what your revenue model is, for instance, whether you're selling SaaS products or whether you're selling one time or downloadable products. If you're selling to consumers or you're selling to businesses, the platform works equally well for both of those. If you're selling purely through an e-commerce or self-service model, or you're also working with a sales force, we can support all of that. And then also the way that you deploy our solution. It can be deployed in a hosted manner, it can be deployed in an embedded manner, or in a virtually completely headless manner. So it's highly, highly flexible. Lastly is going back to this notion of our business model as a merchant of record. I touched on one of the areas, tax management, that we take on, but we take on a lot of other things. Fraud and risk are things that are really complex, particularly if you're selling on a global basis. We manage all of the buyer support as it relates to the transaction. And then we consult with our customers. So we're more than just a technology platform. We're really a combination of a technology platform and a managed service. And if you're a emerging growth company, your key focus is, I want to improve my product as much as I can. I want to put my resources there. I don't want to put it into figuring out how to build the best commerce solution. And by being a merchant of record, we really take on an awful lot of the heavy lifting and enable them to free themselves up to focus on what they do best. And that is pretty unique in the e-commerce world. There are not a lot of people that have our business model.
Yeah, so with SaaS or the whole e-commerce world changing so much, and the growing importance of international markets, how does FastSpring help businesses expand globally? Then how does that happen?
So expanding globally is challenging, particularly when you are a small
Right.
company. The world's still a big place in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
So I would say the first thing we do is we are a one-stop shop. So if you're selling around the world and you're not using a solution like us, you're probably cobbling together a lot of different vendors,
Hmm.
probably disparate markets where you don't have any feet on the street. So you can't underestimate the value of being a one-stop shop. Secondly, because we are focused pretty much exclusively on people that sell globally, we're pretty good at localizing the commerce experience. So it's local language, it's local payment methods, it's local currency. All of those things matter pretty dramatically if you're trying to have a well-oiled machine as a global commerce offering. I mentioned earlier, we're the payment processor. In reality, we work with multiple payment providers behind the scenes, and we're the ones that have those interactions and relationships, and we route to optimize approval rates and cost on a global basis. That's not easy to do on your own, particularly
No.
as a small company. We have the ability to tailor pricing around the world. So,
It's
as
awesome.
you can imagine, particularly if you're selling software, the cost of producing it, marginal cost is zero. You're probably not going to want to sell at the same price in the US as you want to in a place like Brazil. So we've got ways of enabling you to price differentially in every market around the world, either doing it manually or doing it in an intelligent, automated way, because exchange rates are fluctuating on a
Yes,
daily basis. So you can use our technology to
all day.
automate that in intelligent ways. And then we've got some technology in place that prevents people from gaming the system, being in the US and trying to buy out of Brazil to get the lower price. So, that's another small thing we do.
It's crazy.
I mentioned everything we do in tax calculation, collection, remittance, registration everywhere around the world, filing, and then audits. Those are a real thing in e-commerce. As you get audited, maybe by the government of Turkey. If you're a small company based wherever, you probably don't know how to
Yeah.
respond to that audit. We've seen a lot of those, so we do. We provide around the clock buyer support. And then finally, back to this notion of we educate people. We've seen a lot in global e-commerce. So, they don't need to go out and figure it all out on their own. We can help them. So there's a long list of ways in which we really help people go global because it is complex.
And I know you mentioned a lot of the things that FastSpring does help out with. What are some common challenges that businesses face when it comes to e-commerce, and how does
Yes.
FastSpring help out?
Yeah, so what I would say is it's very common that people underestimate the challenges of e-commerce. And the reality is e-commerce is complex, and the more successful you are, the more complex it gets for a whole host of reasons. So it is relatively easy to get up and running and accept payments in a particular geography with a lot of different providers out there. And often people will get up and running. What they typically underestimate is how dynamic the payments ecosystem and landscape is. It is changing on a very rapid
Oh yeah.
basis. So payment methods are proliferating like mad. And, people kind of initially think of credit cards. Obviously, wallets like Apple Pay, Google Pay come into play. But you start to get into these these international markets, and it rapidly expands beyond there, and it's ever changing. So that's one area. Tax rates, tax laws, regulations, those are changing on a very, very frequent basis around the world. Privacy laws and requirements, those are changing around the world. Fraud is another one. If you want to see your business shut down overnight, it's, lose the battle with fraudsters. Processors will shut you down. So, people don't really understand the complexity of that and what it takes to get ahead of that. So, we really help in all of these areas. And I guess the last thing I would say is not environmental, it's the company's own business model often evolves as people get more successful. They're introducing new products. They're
Right.
introducing new revenue models. They may want to go from perpetual license to subscription. They may want to go from seat licenses to usage-based models, etc. We enable them to really experiment very, very rapidly and do it all in one platform, as opposed to having to cobble something together across 3, 4, 5, 6 different platforms to make any change. So that's an awful lot of what's really changing in the implications.
Right. I love that FastSpring's platform is an all-in-one solution. Makes it so much easier and just gets the business to focus on operating and growing their business. I think that's such a great solution. And then, with, technology innovating and with it advancing so quickly, could you, in your perspective, discuss the role of technology and the innovation in shaping the future of e-commerce and how fast brands keeping up with the trends?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, technology and innovation obviously are paramount in our industry and in our business. Like every other industry, it's shaping everything. At a high level, I would kind of characterize it in 3 areas. Technology and innovation are reducing friction from the buyer's perspective.
Hmm. I agree.
They're reducing it from the seller's perspective, and in a lot of ways, making it safer to buy, because e-commerce is inherently risky and fraud evolves at an incredibly rapid rate. So the technologies need to evolve at equal or faster rate to combat that. So let me just elaborate a little bit on each one. From the buyer's perspective, what it means to reduce friction is a lot of things. It's being able to purchase where you want to, how you want to, in the simplest manner possible, and being exposed to things in a much more contextualized way. So a lot of this is probably pretty intuitive what I'm talking about. But for example, being able to purchase on desktop or mobile, from your social feed or from a website with any payment method of your choosing in one-click fashion. And it means you're exposed to the products and services that are most relevant to your needs and wants. From a seller perspective, what reducing friction is really all about is being able to offer this phenomenal buyer experience in the simplest manner possible. If you went back before a lot of the technology existed today, it would be impossible to do the things
Oh,
that I
100%.
just mentioned. So that's what technology is really doing on the seller side, is it's making the sellers able to keep up with what the buyer's expectations are. And from the safety of perspective, things like AI, things like multi-factor authentication, absolutely critical to staying ahead of fraudsters, because they're not slowing down. They're accelerating at an incredible pace. They're using technology.
Right.
We need to stay ahead of that. So, the second question I think was, how do we innovate? How do we use technology? Because it's not an easy thing to keep up with all of
No,
this.
no, not at all.
And that's a challenge for our business, in a lot of ways. So obviously we seek to innovate on our own. And I mentioned, some of the ways we create an innovative culture earlier. Second, we're very smart, at least I think we're smart, in how we use third-party technologies. When I got into the business, one of my conclusions was we were trying to do too much. There were areas where we could never be a true world-class industry leader in this portion of our functionality, but there were those that were out there doing that. And, rather than try and compete with that, we embed their technology in ours. So we use a lot of different third-party technologies in our solution. AI is a great example of that. We're using that in a number of places within our solution today. Fraud is just one of those. So that's the second. Third is, a little bit related to the first, which was innovating on our own, is looking around, both in our industry and in related industries, drawing inspiration from, what are others doing? What are analogous problems that are being solved by technology? I spend a lot of my time doing that. And in my role, I talk to a lot of investment bankers. I talk to a lot of private equity firms. I'm always asking them, what are they seeing that others are doing? And you learn an awful lot by doing that. And then lastly, I would say our customers are one of the best sources of innovation. Remember, we focus on software companies and other digital goods providers. These are entrepreneurs at heart. Many of our customers are founder-led. These are entrepreneurs that came from everywhere in the world, often, some pretty hard environments, and were successful. They're generally very bright, very creative, very innovative people. They are constantly challenging us. And, another thing I spend a lot of my time doing is talking to our customers, understanding what needs do they have that we're not meeting or that nobody is meeting. That's what I love is, what are the problems you have that you just haven't found the solution to? And, what might that solution look like? So there's a lot of different ways.
No, that's so true. Whenever someone invents something, they're trying to create a solution, right, for that problem. And that's why we have AirPods, microphones, whatever it is due to their creating a solution for that. And it's so true. The payment system that with technology, it's advancing so rapidly, especially with, we came from paying people with cash now to paying people with their phone now, right? Who would have thought that we'll get to that level? And it's so fast. And with that being said, what would you say the key trends you see in the e-commerce industry in the in the next coming years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So I'll just touch on a few. I think one of the single most impactful is the globalization of e-commerce.
Hmm.
So if we limit it to digital e-commerce, so people selling digital goods, because that's what we have the best vantage point into. The US is still the slight majority of purchase volume worldwide. That is not going to last. That is eroding quickly. And you see, every other emerging market in the world growing and gaining share with every passing year. So thinking far more globally than people have historically if, they're selling via e-commerce, because that's where the future is. I mentioned this one, it's very tied to globalization, but proliferation of payment methods will only continue. The way people buy in the US looks pretty different from the way people buy in other
Oh, yeah.
parts of the world. So, understanding the importance of catering to that if you want to be successful globally is really important. Next big one we haven't talked at all about, which is B2B is becoming an increasingly important aspect of e-commerce. So most of us, when we think of e-commerce, we still think of companies like Amazon. And, excluding
Yeah,
AWS here, but,
right.
Amazon is all B2C or very largely B2C. The reality is in the last, 5-8 years, there has been a tremendous evolution in the way businesses sell to their customers. It used to be you sold through a sales team, full stop. And it was either do you have a field sales team or do you have an inside sales team? But that was kind of it. And what you're seeing more and more is product-led growth, products that sell virally and people buy them online. Now, they may still have a sales team involved, but an awful lot of their distribution is online. Companies like Slack are a great example of that. It's become pretty ubiquitous in business. So that's a third very big trend is e-commerce is not just going to be about B2C going forward. B2B is going to become an increasingly large share and potentially dominant share at some point in the future. And then the last thing I would mention is we're going to see pricing and billing models evolve. So, we've gone in software from one time to subscription. That's continuing to evolve to more complex models, which are often very usage-based or hybrid subscription
Right.
usage-based. As people start to think about how do I deliver the right value for the price to expand my accessible market, you have to get a little more sophisticated in your pricing models to do that. So that will be, I think, another major trend.
I definitely agree. At the end of the day, back to what you were saying earlier, you have to look at the buyer's perspective as well, right? Whenever you're creating any payment method itself. But yeah, that's definitely true. So with all these upcoming trends, how has FastSpring adapted to the changing e-commerce landscape?
Yeah, I would say in short, by looking forward, not back. So this goes back a little bit to the book I mentioned at the onset, The Innovator's Dilemma. So an example here, when I came in about 4.5 years ago, the majority of our businesses sold via perpetual license model, and B2B transactions represented a minority of what our transaction volume was on our platform.
Mhm.
And it's no secret that SaaS is the future of software. Not even the future; it's very much the
It
present.
is the future. Yeah.
The easy thing for us to do would have been to continue to focus on what our bread and butter was. Companies that were selling downloadable software to consumers. Um, we were very successful there. We had a great brand there. We could continue to win, but that wasn't going to grow the business in the way that we all aspired to do. So it was putting a stake in the ground around, no, we're going to build capabilities to really be a leader in SaaS. And we're going to build the capabilities to be a leader in B2B. And we're going to divert some resources from our core in order to do that. And we're going to transform the company. And we're going to, frankly, cannibalize ourselves to some extent. But, on the other side of that is going to be a much brighter future for all of us. So we've largely done that. Fast forward a few years from when we made that decision, the majority of our transaction volume is now subscription. The majority of our transactions are B2B, and the business is accelerating. But we went through, a bit of a lull there as we retooled the business. It was a little bit painful, but we're now coming out the opposite end and accelerating, and we've got a really bright future as a result of it. So that's how we've chosen to do it. It's not an easy thing to do in the moment, but if you can stick with it, ultimately it's critical to long-term success.
So with it being the end of the year of 2024, and then you talk about just moving forward, what's some upcoming developments or even features that fast-breaking users can look forward to?
Yeah, so one of my favorites is one-click ordering. So
Oh
everyone's
yeah,
familiar with
yes,
that from
yeah.
Amazon. We just brought that to market, so most of our customers are just starting to experiment with it. But it's an example of really simplifying things from a buyer's perspective. If they bought from a seller on our platform, they can buy again with a single click. Removes a huge amount of friction. As we're continuing to push more and more into SaaS, we're also doing a lot on the analytic front. People think about analytics differently when it's a recurring product. Renewal, retention are really, really important. So we're bringing to market some pretty great analytics around all of that to help them understand their business better and respond accordingly. I can go on, but those are some of the highlights.
So what's the vision or for the future of FastSpring, and how do you plan to achieve that?
Yeah. So what I would say here is today we've got a great solution with, I think, an incredibly compelling value proposition aimed at emerging growth sellers of digital goods that sell globally. But the reality is, too few of those companies know about FastSpring. So,
Yeah,
my
true.
immediate vision is we want to be the go-to provider for all of these companies because they should be selling with either us or somebody else with our model because it is the right decision. I firmly believe it's not just self-serving. They will be more successful using our model and I believe FastSpring. And then I want to expand beyond software into other forms of digital goods.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
now, how we get there, we're already doing these things. So it's continuing to invest in sales, in marketing, in partnerships to continue to get the word out. Um, we can't rely solely on word of mouth. We rely on that an awful lot, but ultimately, if we want to be known, we need to invest, and we're doing those things.
So, all right, I have one last question. It's directly towards you. Okay. So
That's
I hope I hope one day I would love to be an entrepreneur, a CEO. So what advice would you give to any aspiring entrepreneurs and future CEOs?
my advice more than anything is be willing to take risk and accept failures, both of yourself and your team. Um, you can't succeed if you're not willing to take risks and you're not willing to embrace the failures. That's when the learning is greatest. That's probably my biggest takeaway from my career.
That is such amazing advice. Thank you. I appreciate that. I learned a lot from you, by the way. My goal was just ask you a bunch of questions of who you are and just understanding the business and your whole thought process. I do definitely appreciate you being guest on my show. Definitely, if you have any businesses that are you're willing to expand and need help with your software, reach out to FastSpring. They have a huge platform. If you look at their clientele, we help out with all sorts of scaling of businesses, you name it, for small to even large companies. Um, Reach out to David or even people in our sales team. But David, that's all the questions I have for you. I know your time is short here, but I do want to say thank you so much for being guests on my show.
Al, you're welcome, and I really enjoyed it. Hopefully, it was valuable to others, but I really appreciate you having me on today. Thanks a lot,
All right,
Richard.
everyone, take care.